You must tell me all your secrets. Remember, we must share everything together. Everything.
How would you like to disappear?
Disappear?
Go undercover.
You know this man?
Who's here? I'm here. You're here. These victims are all the same physical type.
What about him, Skip?
Late 20s, 140, 150 pounds. Dark hair, dark eyes.
Have you ever seen him before?
I want to send you out there to see if you can attract this guy.
How, where?
A New York City detective in search of a killer is about to disappear into the night.
Is it dangerous?
I can't talk about it.
Hello there, and welcome to Girls, Guts, and Giallo. I'm Annie Rose Malamet. Today we're talking about Cruising from 1980, directed by William Friedkin. I'm here with my friend Pacifico Silano. Hi, Pacifico.
Hi, Annie.
Do you want to introduce yourself and tell people a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Sure. I'm a lens-based artist who has an interest in queer LGBTQ history, particularly the archive. I make a lot of work around HIV/AIDS, and a lot of my imagery is sourced from gay erotica from this time period, post-Stonewall, height of the AIDS crisis.
Usually, this is the first time I've had a man on the show, and usually I talk about the feminine in film, so that doesn't necessarily have to be women. It can just be the feminine. I don't know if I would classify this film as talking about the feminine at all, but I really wanted to do it because it was on this podcast. I love talking about controversial films. This was certainly controversial when it came out, and to this day is controversial. And also because, I don't know if you know, but there's been a lot of discourse going on this month on the internet about leather sexuality at Pride.
Yeah.
So for Pride Month, I definitely wanted to make sure that we covered a film that deals with those themes. When did you first see Cruising?
So I saw Cruising when I was in graduate school, probably like 2010. I was just finally like catching up on like my gay cinema, and somebody recommended it. Actually, it's not true. Like, that is true, but my conservative aunt, when I came out, she was like, "Did you ever see the movie Cruising with Al Pacino? It's a very interesting film. You should really see it." So that was sort of like my straight Trump voting Aunt Catherine's introduction or way of connecting with me. She saw this movie that is a really horrible depiction of homosexuality in mainstream media. So that was always in the back of my head. So then when I finally had to do my research with my graduate thesis project, I remembered that. So that kind of also factored into my reading of the film.
Yeah, I saw this, I want to say 8 years ago or something. And at the time, I really was watching it for the camp aspect and like laughing my ass off while I was watching it. But during my rewatch a few days ago, I've decided that I love this movie and I think it's a great movie. It's like certainly extremely campy, but it's also really interesting historical artifact.
Yeah, I think that people were really upset at the time. Like my uncle and his friends, they were activists. They were actually like physically like picketing when they were filming it here in New York City in the meatpacking district. So in some ways, I'm probably going against my uncle's legacy. But I agree. I think it's a trash camp classic, and it really deserves its place in the history of bad movies that we enjoy.
Yeah, totally. So I haven't been able to get a hold of it, but it's based on the novel of the same name by Gerald Walker from 1970. Have you read it?
I have not, but I'm sure it is a page turner.
Yeah, it's I couldn't get it in time for our episode, but you can get it used online. It's directed by William Friedkin, who also directed The French Connection and The Exorcist, which I didn't know that. I had forgotten that he directed The Exorcist. Which was also extremely controversial.
Yeah, he was really into, getting people upset, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. It stars Al Pacino.
I mean, it's kind of like a horror movie, right? It's just like
for sure.
It's a gay horror movie.
It's a gay horror movie,
and especially in 1980. I'm sure that was like really terrifying for mainstream Americans.
Oh, absolutely. Pacifico does a lot of visual art surrounding the AIDS crisis, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about what was happening politically in 1980, like if you have any kind of...
Well, I think there's 1980, it's still sort of, there's just like a lot of sort of turmoil, right? You're leading up to the AIDS crisis. I think there's a lot of problems with like civil unrest, getting equality, and there was a lot of sort of attitudes shifting at that time period. So this movie came out at like a really horrible time because it really sort of tried to, kind of go against perceptions of like mainstreaming homosexuality and gay identity. And so, it's a certain place in time when you look at this film and you realize like what's being represented, because representation matters. We talk a lot about that today, about the kind of movies that are being made, who's starring in them, and what they're projecting. So just think about it, it's a post-Stonewall time period. People are fighting for equality. They're making some strides, and there's a movie like this that comes along that's really regressive, deeply flawed, plays into every kind of stereotype that straight Americans would have towards particularly gay men, and it does not do anybody any favors in the community.
Yeah.
Is that good? I feel like...
No, yeah, totally. Yeah, for sure. Because that's part of why I wanted to have you on the podcast, as you're one of the foremost experts.
Oh, I don't know about experts.
To me.
I spent a lot of time looking through, magazines from this time period and reading articles and whatnot. And, so I'm informed in some way.
Yeah, well, it's, we can view it and we can enjoy it now, but it's also important to remember why it was hated and, why I completely understand why it was protested. Friedkin originally wasn't interested in the movie until he came across a series of articles in the Village Voice about a serial killer who was targeting gay men in the leather scene in New York. Friedkin also knew a police officer who had gone into the same sort of deep undercover work that Al Pacino goes into in this film. And Paul Bateson, a doctor's assistant who had appeared in The Exorcist, who, while being prosecuted for another murder, was implicated, though never charged, in 6 of the Leather Bar murders. So Friedkin actually had a personal connection to this story. All of these factors made him want to make this film. In his research, Friedkin worked with many members of the mafia, who at the time owned many of the city's gay bars, which I actually didn't know but makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
Originally, so Al Pacino, of course, stars in this movie, famously. Originally, Friedkin wanted Richard Gere for the role because he thought he was more androgynous.
Yeah.
And he had also done American Gigolo.
I mean, yeah, he wasn't afraid to show his dick. That would have been great.
Exactly. Yeah, I wonder what the... I might have liked that more.
I would have, definitely.
Yeah.
I had a crush on Richard Gere growing up. I mean, he's kind of nondescript now that I'm an adult and I have taste. But at that time period, he definitely would have been perfect for that.
The MPAA originally gave Cruising an X rating. Friedkin claims that he took the film before the MPAA board about 50 times at a cost of $50,000. Very convenient paralleling of the numbers here, Friedkin. And deleted 40 minutes of footage from the original cut before he secured an R rating. The deleted footage, according to Friedkin, consisted entirely of footage from the clubs in which the portions of the film were shot and consisted of absolutely graphic sexuality. That material showed the most graphic homosexuality, with Pacino watching and with the information that he may have been participating.
If only.
If only.
And that's where James Franco got his idea for what is an interior leather bar.
Right, from 2013.
He was just like, I'm going to recreate what is the deleted 40 minutes of this movie. And instead it was like a giant wet fart. It was so
I haven't seen it, so it's not good.
It is one of the worst attempts at making an art house film I've ever seen, and maybe it's the queer baiting. I don't know what it is. For me, James Franco does nothing at this point. It's unless you're going to show me a video of you sitting on some guy's face, I really just don't care at this point.
Right. He's theoretically queer,
yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Well, he probably actually is.
He gets to be queer without any of the repercussions.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, he's super
that whole movie was just him finding a young Al Pacino lookalike, and the stress and rigor it's taking for him to, put himself into this role, and it's literally just 10 gay men in a basement that looks like a bar. And it's just so stressful for him. He literally is having the same effects that Al Pacino's character is having in Cruising.
Okay.
And it's a documentary, pseudo documentary. It's horrible, horribly boring. That's what it's really guilty of.
I wish it was good, because it actually sounds like a great concept. But yeah, no,
a really missed opportunity.
Yeah, totally. As we were talking about, the film was highly protested by gay rights groups. Vito Russo, who wrote The Celluloid Closet, which is one of the preeminent scholarship on queerness in film, thought it was a dangerous representation. Throughout the summer of 1979, members of New York's gay community protested against the production of the film. Protests started at the urging of gay journalist Arthur Bell, who was the writer who wrote the series of articles on the unsolved murders of gay men. Gay people were urged to disrupt filming, and gay-owned businesses to bar the filmmakers from their premises. People attempted to interfere with the shooting by pointing mirrors from rooftops to ruin lighting for scenes, blasting, this is so extra and gay, blasting whistles and air horns near locations, and playing loud music. 1,000 protesters marched through the East Village demanding the city withdraw support for the film. And as a result, the movie's audio was largely overdubbed in order to remove the noise caused by off-camera protesters. Al Pacino said that he didn't believe it was harmful representation, of course, because that counts, because you would know, Al Pacino. Believed it was harmful representation because it's only about a fragment of gay life, the same way that you wouldn't say that the mafia was representative of all Italian-American gay life.
Well, as an Italian, I can say that, he is absolutely unequivocally wrong. That's all that people equate.
That is, first of all, that is a huge stereotype about Italian Americans.
I'm glad he reinforced that.
Right. And second of all, you're equating the leather community with the mafia.
Yeah.
Which they're just trying to have some kinky sex. Yeah. They're not trying to kill people.
Yeah.
It's a ridiculous comparison. So critical reception was largely negative, but in recent years it's been re-examined. And there's a lot more critical scholarship.
Like Showgirls.
Exactly. Which I always talk about the book by Andrew Nyman, It Doesn't Suck, which is a defense of Showgirls.
Yes.
Yeah, it's short. It's a good read. You should pick it up. So gay critic Jack Summersby took issue with the lack of motivation for the killer, which I don't necessarily agree with. I think there is motivation. And with the watering down of Steve Burns' character from the novel, because in the novel, Burns has a history of homophobic harassment and racism. And in the film, he's made into some kind of naive all-American cop good guy who's like kind of perverted by this leather scene.
Yeah, his descent into
Exactly.
depravity.
So the novel is a lot more nuanced about that. The second major criticism of the film at its release came from gay activists who felt that the film had a homophobic political message and that it portrayed gay men as being attracted to violence, which could in turn justify homophobic hate crimes. However, in Exercising Cruising, a behind-the-scenes documentary on the Cruising DVD, Friedkin alleges that the film was actually supported by much of the New York City's leather community and S&M community, who appeared by the dozens as extras in the nightclub scenes.
Yeah, I knew about that. There were people who were definitely into it. They liked being seen on camera.
That would be me, probably.
Yeah. And what bar did they film it at again? Was it at?
Oh, I forgot the name, but there was actually a hate crime at the bar that they filmed it at afterwards.
We'll just edit that out. We got to know our shit.
We got it. Yeah, don't let the people know you don't know. Oh, but I also wanted to say that some critics think it's a very interesting glimpse into gay life before the AIDS panic really set in.
Well, no, absolutely.
Okay, I always joke about Camille Paglia on this podcast because she's constantly coming up. Like, she came up in the Basic Instinct episode and the Daughters of Darkness episode that I did, and now again for Cruising. And in a 2006 interview, Paglia said, "I loved Cruising. While everyone else was furiously condemning it, it had an underground decadence that wasn't that different from the story of O or other European high porn of the 1960s. I sort of agree with her.
I kind of agree.
I know. I'm like, this podcast, if anything, this podcast has maybe made me realize that I don't hate Camille Paglia as much as I thought I did. As much as I'm loath to say that.
Yeah. Every once in a while, there's that, common ground.
Exactly. Well, she loves all the same crappy shit that I do. So maybe that's
the gateway drug.
Exactly. Right. Into Camille Paglia feminism. 2 months after the film's release, a bar prominently displayed in the movie, which we can't find the name right now, came under attack by a man with a submachine gun, killing 2 patrons and wounding 12 others. Friedkin refused to comment on the attack.
Of course he did.
Yeah. Is there anything else about the history of this film that you wanted to talk about?
I don't know. I think we're kind of like parsing through it. You know what I mean? I think that so much of the film is sort of a like window into the way that particularly gay people were viewed through like a wide cross section of America. So it's not just like, not even though not everybody's in the BDSM scene. I think that for somebody in the Midwest, that was definitely like what they equated homosexuality between 2 men. It's this sort of in their eyes perverse, like sort of kind of descent into being I don't know, I guess completely reckless and driven by sexual desire, right? And I think that that's what that movie really kind of reinforces, is that like gay men just want to have sex and don't care where they get it from, and are very interested and turned on by danger. And so it really kind of like does reinforce these really negative stereotypes. But there's also like we're talking about it now in the sort of camp classic, lens that we're reading it through. It's so absurd that anybody who is living as a gay man or as a queer person can see that like that's actually not the reality.
Right.
Like it's not very often that like 6'4", men in jock straps and cowboy hats like walk into like a police interrogation room and like smack you across the face, and then walk out saying nothing. So there's such a suspension of disbelief that happens in a film like this if you really are, somebody who's a part of the community. But, that said, you can understand why people were so upset at the end of the day. But I often find that like films that really get people upset, that really get under the skin, that really, just really get people riled up and feel like it's an affront to their identity and their dignity is the movie comes out and then it's just so bad and it's so critically panned that it doesn't even matter. It was like never going to be a hit.
Yeah. And at the same time, like, I'm very wary of trying to, how do I want to say this? I'm very wary of trying to appeal to the mainstream and say, you know, we're actually not like this. You know, it's like we're not sexually driven. We're not turned on by violence.
But what's wrong with that?
What is wrong with that?
That's the flip side of it. The other flip side is like, so what? Like, we don't have to be nuns. Like, yeah, we're free to feel our sexual desires and to embrace them. Like, we're not repressed. So, I mean, part of me feels very connected with that whole like dance sequence of like all of the men in leather just, you know, doing poppers with Al Pacino as his butthole's puckering open as he does poppers for the first time. It's just really like kind of amazing. It's like he gets to come into this very exclusive world of like freedom in 1980s America.
Oh my God, and it's right there. It's 1980, and there's one woman in the movie.
Yeah, his girlfriend, right?
Yeah. So
who just cannot relate. She just does not understand what's going on with her.
She's
her
completely
husband.
Oblivious.
She's like, "What's wrong?
Exactly.
Talk to me."
And in that way, like, the movie kind of acts as this pure fantasy space. You know, I think of stuff like the L Word and like Queer as Folk, and we're like, of course, life is not like that. If life were like that, like, my life would be a lot better. Like, if there was a fucking gay person on every corner who wanted to have sex with me, like, my life would be so much better. But there's not. So in this, I see this movie as kind of like almost this fantasy space.
Oh, absolutely.
And it celebrates in a way, like sexuality. It's so overtly sexual, and I think only if you already have a negative idea, you're going to watch it and think negatively about gay people.
Oh, of course, yeah.
And fuck those people.
I mean, I guess my big question is like putting yourself in like the mind of like a 1980s like I keep saying Midwestern. I don't know. I'm talking about the heartland a lot today, but it's just this idea of like these people who are straight and are going into a movie theater to see this. Are they cheering on the deaths of gay men? Are they excited to see them get murdered? Are they fearing for the character? You know, it's like, usually when you see a horror movie, you don't want the person in the film to die. You know, you're following the characters and, you know, there's the chase usually and whatnot. And there's like a whole sort of psychology that comes with watching a horror movie that I'm so curious. I wonder what it must have been like. And, you know, we'll never know because it's a time capsule. But what must that have been like? Who were they rooting for? Were they rooting for the killer? Were they rooting for, you know, Al Pacino to get out of this deep, dark, seedy underbelly?
Totally.
Or were they disgusted with him? Like, if they thought there was ambiguity that he in turn becomes a gay psychopathic murderer? Like, what are those? What are the answers to those questions? And I don't know that we'll ever get them, but they're really complicated. And I think that sets like this really interesting, you know, dynamic of rewatching this film and reevaluating its sort of cultural legacy. So those are some thoughts that come to my mind when I think about that film, is that it's not so black and white, and it's really messy, and I don't know. I think about that when I'm looking through anything through the lens of today. You know, is like anything that's been captured on film or as a photograph. Like, we read it through a completely different set of circumstances. You know, we now know about like the AIDS crisis, so we read pornography very specifically when we look at it from that time period. Like, there's all of these different ways that we re-engage with material as time goes by, and I think this movie is like a perfect example of that. Though I don't think that as many people are on the same page as you and I are.
No.
That this movie is so bad that it's good. That, you know, like it, you know, it's so horrifyingly problematic, but like it sort of transcends that. It becomes like its own thing where it is actually so preposterous and so offensive that it becomes laughable.
And good.
And good.
Yeah.
You know, it becomes like a psychosexual thriller for gay men that is being marketed to America.
There's not a single... There's the straight people in it are cops, but that's it.
Yeah.
Like, it's a complete fantasy. And that I find really fascinating. Like,
yeah.
Well, we'll get into it more when we start to talk more specifically about the plot.
Sorry, I'm laughing because the plot is so absurd.
It's absurd, yeah.
You know, and the acting is like, you know, if it's not Al Pacino, it's not good in the movie. It just is unfortunate.
Oh, yeah. And, oh, God.
The
Yeah,
guy's just like, are you going to hurt me now?
Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Okay. So
is that what he says?
Yes.
It's something like that. It's so...
It's, well...
That's what I say when I'm about to be murdered as I'm getting like...
Are you going to hurt me now? As he's tied up.
And he's looking helplessly, but also kind of like he's like...
It's porn. It's straight up porn.
Yeah.
It opens with some boatmen, New York City skyline, some boatmen finding an arm in the river. The cops are trying to find a murderer, so we know that there's a murderer going around killing gay men in New York City.
The arm is a really good, you know, giveaway.
Yeah. Yep.
I like subtlety.
Right. The cops are patrolling. These two cops are patrolling the neighborhood, the East Village. And through the neighborhood, they're harassing these two trans women who are played by two cis men. And they're being homophobic.
Yeah.
And the cops are they're antagonizing these two trans women who we are to suppose are sex workers. And there you see like all of these young gay men and trans women in the East Village. Everybody's white. There's
well, of course,
yeah,
in this version
of the world, yeah, and they're all, you know, commingling, and the cops are patrolling through, which used to happen, like, actually, right? They would patrol through the neighborhood and try to find people who were, you know, what they considered indecent activity. And they harass these two trans women and extort them for sex, you know, in exchange for not being arrested.
Yeah.
So that is how the film opens. So the cops are painted as the bad guys. So it's quite immediately. I think for however poor the representation is of these two trans women characters, I think you're supposed to sympathize with them.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's just me reading it through my personal lens, but I don't know if you remember that scene, but they're pretty disgusting, those two guys, and they're supposed to be. We see a figure in sunglasses who we later learn is the homo killer.
That's right. They call him a homo killer.
Yeah, yeah.
I wish that would re-enter into like the culture, you know, like homo killer is just such a amazing name.
Put that in your Instagram bio. The homo killer.
Yeah, let's see how many people block me. And, I think that humor will be lost. Yeah. Like subtlety is lost on Twitter and Instagram.
No, totally. We see this figure in sunglasses entering a leather club. And what I noticed immediately about this scene here was people are flagging. Right, so a lot is made of flagging in this film. Some guy is flagging left brown, which means you like to shit on people.
Yeah.
Some guy is flagging right red, which means you like to get fisted. So there's kind of semi-accurate representation.
Yeah.
Yeah, immediately.
I'm not gonna yuck your yum.
Yeah, totally. So he has this discourse with this guy who's going to be the first victim, where he says, why do you come here to the guy? And the victim says, because I have ego problems and I need to be worshipped and adored.
Which is like every white gay man that you've ever met.
Totally.
In a New York City bar. Sorry, I'm not trying to make generalizations.
No, but for sure. But it's like, this is when because I went into this sort of being like, okay, I try to reclaim everything. So let me like try to see this through the lens of the gay activists and like how horrible it is. And I was like, honestly, they're kind of accurate. Like, it's kind of accurate. Like, that's... I have ego problems and I want to be worshipped and adored. Like, I say
mean,
that
that's
about
kind of me. That's kind of all of us. So.
I say that all the time. I always make jokes about, like, I'm a top because I have ego problems. Like, that's it was like shocking to me that they actually said that. They go to the St. James Hotel, and of course, my notes are ridiculous. Oh, okay. One of my notes is just, this is hot. They have sex. The victim, you know, has this suitcase of all his fetish gear. He has a giant dildo in it.
Yeah. I like, though, that he's just, like, sensible and, like, packs everything in, like, a nice suitcase.
Which is realistic. Like, I don't know if you ever been involved in the leather scene at all, but, like, as somebody who's involved in it, that is accurate. Like, people bring suitcases with all their toys to, like, have a scene. So then the killer ties this guy up. He takes out his knife. This is the other thing, is like the knife play. And the guy's, you know, saying like, "Are you going to hurt me?" It's almost, I was trying to, because of course I watched this with my mother. I was trying to explain to her that I felt like the film was almost purposely ambiguous. It's marrying play violence to real violence in a very, like, purposeful way.
I definitely see that reading when you say it, but for me, I just saw it through the lens of, like, cheesy 80s horror and him just being like, "Are you gonna hurt me?"
Yeah.
Like, it's over.
Right.
Your screen time is done.
Right, exactly. And it's definitely that. But I also feel like when you're sinking so much money into a film, like, there is intentional stuff that has to be going on. Like, I think that is like their, you know, almost like a consensual non-consent sort of scenario, and it's supposed to be, you know, like
a dom sub relationship.
Yes,
for
exactly.
Sure.
Yeah. So there's ambiguous consent stuff, but then he stabs him. Yeah. Really violently. And the next thing we see are the cops at his autopsy, and they say that his anus was dilated at the time of his death.
I remember that.
Yeah.
That is...
So it's very salacious and exploitative of these gay men's bodies and the activities that they participate in.
I hope my autopsy report says that my anus was dilated.
Well, his anus was dilated at the time of his death, so he definitely fucked. Right? Yeah,
it's so vulgar.
It's so vulgar, and they just say it like it's nothing. They're plying one of the trans sex workers from the beginning for information, for details about who she thinks might be this killer. But then when she tries to talk about the cops that are harassing her, they don't believe her. Yeah. This is never, you know, really... She comes in and goes in and throughout the film. I don't know. She's almost like a Cassandra figure or something. Like, nobody will listen to her, but she's the only one who's, like...
Speaking the truth.
Speaking the truth, which, you know, is kind of accurate of our community.
No, for sure. Yeah. I mean, like, that's, like, so real.
Yeah. It is. And it really, you know, emphasizes, you know, all the other gay men in the film are super marginalized and live in rundown apartments. But she is so marginalized. Like, she's like on the streets. She's on the streets, yeah. Which is maybe for unintentionally accurate on their part, but accurate.
That's the thing, is like, I don't think there's a lot of as far as like intentional like decisions in that film. I think that, like, you know, they got lucky that we can read it through that lens today in some ways. Like, I just don't know. It's like I said, it's like a weird, it's such a, I mean, it's aged in a way that, like, we're able to imbue it with that. But I don't know. I find that, like, the director and the people involved, like, I feel like they were a bit clueless when they were making the film. And they were, like, these happy accidents that were, like, true to life in some ways. But I also want it to be a masterpiece. So it's really complicated for me.
That's very valid and like definitely why I do this podcast because I'm constantly torn between those things when I watch these movies. So Al Pacino's boss, the captain, calls him into his office, and the first thing he says to him is, "You ever had your cock sucked by a man?" And Al Pacino is like, "What? No."
I really like your Al Pacino impersonation. It was really good, actually.
He's like, "Oh, you gotta be kidding me." They want him to go undercover in the S&M scene. He agrees to it. The next scene, we see him in bed with his girlfriend. He looks pretty disinterested. She says, "Your father called today," and he looks like he's going somewhere else mentally when she says that. So, and it never comes up again.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I wonder. There's so many themes here, albeit perhaps unintentional.
Yeah. No, let's just make them intentional.
Let's make it
because
intentional.
It's intentional, especially for this podcast. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be like a Debbie Downer.
No. You're not being a Debbie Downer. It's fair. We have to like look at both sides, right?
Yeah.
But like I feel like as I was watching it, I was like, there's too many things that line up for it to be completely unintentional, like the father issues, right?
Yeah.
And there is like a certain awareness of the complicated and often bad relationships that gay men have with their fathers.
Whoa. I agreed to come here today. I did not think we were going to go down this road, okay? Hands off. We're not going down there, okay? But yes, it's very real. Daddy issues, yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Okay, so he moves into his gay apartment.
I love his gay apartment.
Yeah.
It's so tragic.
It's
like
so
an
tragic.
efficiency, right? Like these like little like almost like a halfway house for like poor gay people.
Yeah, it's so bad. And it also highlights, because his apartment with his girlfriend was so nice.
Yeah.
It kind of highlights how these two different worlds are living together side by side in the same city in very different conditions. He meets Ted, who is his neighbor, who's wearing a Christopher Street t-shirt. And Ted talks to him about the killings.
He's so annoying.
He's so annoying.
Okay, good. I'm glad you find him annoying too. Like, I really just did not like that character. I did not care about that character. I was just like, bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Spoiler alert. Yeah. Bye.
Exactly. Yeah. Spoiler. Who cares? It's a fucking old movie. Go see it. If you haven't yet. So Al Pacino, Steve Burns, goes to his first leather bar, and he tries to buy a hanky. And the guy behind the counter explains the hanky code to him. He picks a yellow hanky for some reason. And he gets cruised by a guy who has a yellow hanky around his neck at this bar. And, the guy says, like, well, if he's like, I just like to watch. And the guy is like, well, if you like to watch, take that yellow hanky out of the line. Like, they're so serious about it, which I can honestly kind of imagine people being like
really hyped up.
Yeah,
for sure.
Totally.
For sure.
I mean, they're all like on coke or whatever.
Yeah.
I wrote down here, my note here is that the parties are pretty accurate. I mean, as somebody who goes to a fair amount of BDSM parties, like...
It's actually filmed really beautifully.
It is,
like it's like a really amazing cinematic moment in the film. Like I think that it really kind of has. I mean, it's iconic. Like it's when people say the movie Cruising, that's the scene in my mind always goes to. It's like the dance floor.
I think you're thinking of the one that happens later. This is the first time he goes to the leather bar. But all of the scenes are iconic.
Yeah.
Like all of the leather bar scenes.
Yeah.
And like you said, the one that James Franco did the movie about, the one that comes a little later.
Yeah.
That's what people think of when they
think of
this
movie.
movie.
I mean, it's fantastic. It's like this amazing kind of. I mean, it's lit beautifully too. It's like this like blue light.
Totally.
Before HBO stole all the color gels for every like on-demand movie or show that they make. Right.
And it's so like expansive and like it's just such excess, like a Roman orgy or whatever. And I also forgot to tell you that talk about how Al Pacino finds all of these gay porn magazines in his apartment, and one of them is the one you do a lot of work with.
Blue Boy.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I thought of you during that scene.
Blue Boy is so light, though. It's like cheesecake.
Right. The fact that they thought that was like some hardcore
They thought it was
shit.
like this hardcore stuff.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
It's like pinups almost.
Yeah, it's like album reviews on Bette Midler and like
really different gay subculture.
Yeah. I mean,
yeah.
they would like, they would have an S&M like centerfold.
Okay.
But that would be like, a themed issue.
Right.
You know?
He goes to the Central Park cruising spot under the bridge. Guy like cruises him. He walks away with the guy. It cuts. We don't know if he actually had sex with this guy or not. So that's one of the first moments where it becomes ambiguous to if he is actually engaging in these activities or not. And it's supposed to be. I mean, Friedkin said it was supposed to be ambiguous. So the killer is also out on the prowl. He's also in the park.
Yeah.
Has this other victim, and he sings like almost like a nursery rhyme before he kills people. His voice is crazy.
Well, the voiceover is just like, oh my God, who is the voice actor for that movie? Like,
right.
It's clearly not the actor.
No.
Like, it just cannot be.
No.
Because when you finally like see his identity, you're just like, there's no way that this voice is coming from him.
Right. It's so weird. So Al Pacino fucks his girlfriend to prove his masculinity.
Oh, of course.
Yeah, so there's a straight sex scene in the movie.
Thank God.
Thank God. Al Pacino goes to most of this movie is Al Pacino going to different leather bars. That's most of the movie.
Yeah.
There's the part where he goes and it's a cop theme leather bar or cop theme night at a leather bar.
I mean, even the title of the movie and that like nice like tie between cruising like in gay culture and then like cruising in a patrol car, like that sort
absolutely.
of relationship there. It's like so intertwined throughout the whole movie with like cops and, like anonymous sex. And so it's like there's like this really kind of perfect merge between the dual meaning of the name of the movie that
Absolutely.
kind of like brings it into focus in a kind of interesting way.
Yeah, and I think a lot about too the cop fetish imagery that happens in the BDSM community, the leather community, and how that is born from this legacy of trauma of our identities being heavily policed by the state. Nothing like fetishizing your fear and shame.
Yeah, right.
So
I mean, it makes complete sense, though, right? It's like we're so kind of complicated, and in some ways, like I don't know. I think the police fetish is very self-loathing in some ways, but then it's also like about like shame but it's also then about reclaiming that. So it's about like all of these really complicated emotions and subverting the sort of archetype of like masculinity, right? With the police officer. And so this whole movie really does that in a really effective way, I think, where it really just takes like the whole stereotype of the policeman and really makes it fucking gay.
Oh, so gay. He gets kicked out because he's not in a cop uniform, so they will enforce those things.
But he couldn't because then everybody would know that he is not undercover anymore. So that's a really important plot point. Hello. And that is why this movie is trash.
Yep.
Like we've been so serious about this movie, but also we have to remember just how trashy it is.
It's so trashy. No, it's a delight in how trashy it is. A guy tries to pick him up, but he instead he looks like he considers it, and then he goes home to his girlfriend. Then my note here says, we meet this fashion fag.
Me, I show up. I'm on the scene. Yeah. Hey, guys.
Who goes to a peep show, and he gets murdered at the peep show.
It's not nice.
No.
It's really homophobic.
Yeah, that's a terrible way to go.
Yeah.
So, and when he gets murdered, the killer says, "You made me do that," which is something that he says again and again. You made me do that.
Sorry, it's so ridiculous.
It is.
Like, how do you unpack that? Like, we could have a whole thesis just on that.
Right. Okay. I also made a note here. Yeah, we could have a whole thesis just on that. But I also made a note here that Al Pacino is like just wearing his leather clothes around now. Like, as with like the next scene is like he's just in his leather gear. Like, they gave him all of these items. The cops gave him all of these items.
Which is great because leather is really expensive.
Super expensive. It's also summer and it's supposed to be a heat wave and everybody is sweating their asses off in this leather. In this movie, which, I mean, it really adds to the whole like grittiness and you know, sexuality of it. Now we get to the iconic scene. So yes, which is the best scene. There's a man being fisted in a swing. Yeah. Which to me is nothing. But
for representation, it matters, I think.
Yeah, totally.
When was the last time you saw somebody getting fisted in a swing in a mainstream cinema?
You don't even see women getting fisted.
Yeah.
And to see a man getting fisted, like this guy covering his fist.
In Crisco.
His bare fist, by the way, no protection. In Crisco. And then like fisting this man in a swing.
Crisco disco.
Like, people must have been horrified by that. Like, I don't even think straight people knew that was possible.
Right. Mom, I'm gay. She just saw the movie Cruising.
Yes.
She's now concerned that I'm going to get my butthole plunged with a fist.
Yes, exactly.
I'm talking so foul.
No, like the podcast is filthy. Like, don't worry about it. Yeah, no, I like that.
I teach high school kids, so it's fine. It's fine. It's cool.
Well, it's got a little E for explicit next to it. In the...
Oh, good. Yeah. Good. I love that.
But yeah, you can feel comfortable to say whatever you want.
Yeah.
But within.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a very sexual movie, so.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those movies where you're just like, oh, I'm like turned on, but I'm also like disgusted. Which
I'm into.
Yeah. Which is like a whole thing, it's like a whole like kink, actually.
Yeah. No, it's so gross. And you're like, oh my God, nobody's wearing condoms, nobody's wearing gloves. But I mean, it's also really sexy. I mean, this guy's getting fucking fisted. I don't know.
In front of Al Pacino.
In front of Al Pacino, who then...
That's my kink.
Yes.
I want Al Pacino watching.
Watching me while I get fisted. Al asks about this guy, Skip Lee. And, the bartender tells him he's bad news. Then he dances with Skip Lee in this iconic dance scene.
Yeah.
Where he's taking poppers.
Woo!
Yeah.
Woo!
Woo! He is having the time of his life. He loses his mind.
Yeah.
He's legitimately having a good time.
The agony and the ecstasy of Al Pacino.
Yeah, he's legitimately loving it.
Yeah. His dance moves are like out of fucking control.
Out of control.
Like so violent. Really scary and spastic. And, he just keeps going for more. He just is like, give me more poppers. Need more.
But, who hasn't met that circuit queen who's just always a little bit too much? Yeah, no, it's so... I love it. And he's very much, at this point to me, genuinely enjoying himself.
Yeah.
Like, I think he's really into being in this scene now, the leather scene. He tells the cops to watch out for Skip. The trans woman, who I don't believe is ever named, gives info about him. And she says that she heard that someone heard singing in the park before the murder happened. So, like, this nursery rhyme that he's singing, right? The cops go out for a steak for some reason.
Because they're straight men.
Because they're straight men.
Men assert their masculinity by eating meat.
Right. And that's when they realize that the weapon, they look at the steak knife and they realize that the weapon is a steak knife. And I just wrote here in big letters the word meat.
Yeah.
Because it's like very symbolic, right? Like he's using this steak knife. These men are just like meat. And steak is like such this like masculine thing.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, this is a very masculine movie. Like it celebrates the masculine, like these jacked bodies. Every man looks the same in this movie.
Yeah.
To the point where you can't even really tell them apart.
It does like wonders for my body dysmorphia whenever I watch it. I'm like, I hate myself.
Yeah, it's very much that. Very much like glistening muscle gaze. And it celebrates the masculine in a way that is very homoerotic.
Yeah.
And like not for the female gaze in any way. It's very much like for the male gaze, I think. Okay. Oh, Al Pacino. I'm not going to use his name.
Yeah, come on.
Steve Burns.
Like,
it's Al
it's
Pacino.
like, come on.
Yeah, he goes to a motel with Skip to set him up. He's wearing a wire. And he's like coercing Skip into tying him up. They bust into the room. Skip doesn't want to.
Not so fast.
Exactly. They burst into the room and Al Pacino is fucking naked on the bed tied up. Do you remember that scene?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
He probably thought he was going to get like an Academy Award.
oh, for sure. It's
He's
like
I'm
Showgirls.
He's like, I'm going for the gold.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. He thought this was like a really edgy part. The interrogation scene, this is when the only person of color in the film
Shows up.
this giant man in a cowboy hat and a jockstrap.
Nothing else.
Yeah, nothing else. Just comes into the interrogation room and punches Al Pacino in the face.
It's wild.
It's wild. Like, where does that come from?
There's no context.
No context.
And then he leaves and there's no explanation.
No. And Al Pacino is like shocked because he's like, oh, you really hit me, man. Because he's like still undercover. He's in the interrogation with Skip. And Skip is, saying like, it wasn't me. And, Al Pacino is still pretending to be an actual gay man who's also being interrogated with him. But, and they beat the shit out of Skip in this scene. And again, perhaps unintentionally very accurate. Like something there are no qualms about showing the reality of police brutality in this film.
Yeah. I mean, it's so weird because it's like I watch that movie and I definitely think the police are the villain the whole time. But it's also, as a gay person, it's like I'm kind of conditioned to think that. So then when you're like seeing that movie, it's just like it's kind of curious because, again, like I was saying, like, what do you think like middle America's viewpoint was when they were watching that movie? Like, who do you think they were empathizing
Right.
with?
Do you think
like,
they were rooting for the cops?
Yeah.
Is that supposed to be like, good, they're beating up the faggots?
Yeah,
like,
that's what I mean. I just like, I don't know. I things are very different today than they were like 30 years ago. I mean, I just know that like even growing up in the 90s, it was like that was still an attitude being celebrated and you would not be canceled or, you wouldn't receive blowback, that was like within like mainstream acceptance,
Well, even now, like, I don't know if you've been keeping up on any of the discourse surrounding Pride on the internet.
What, corporate pride?
Corporate Pride, but also younger gay people saying keep your sexuality out of Pride. Like, it's not supposed to be a perv free-for-all.
Really?
Like, yeah, keep it at home.
Oh, girl.
Which is very much like an internalized homophobic
I didn't know that
attitude.
was happening.
Oh, it certainly is, which is why I think films like this are important to talk about.
I've been so busy, like, watching the flame wars about corporate pride and, like, who's for it and who's against it. And,
Totally. That's a whole other thing. Well, Pride is a shit show this year. I mean, it is every year. But the kink at Pride thing has been hotly debated right now.
Yeah. Really?
People saying like, don't walk someone on a leash around at Pride. Like, kids could be there.
Who are these people saying this? Like Generation
Z. I don't.
Ooh, girl.
The kids are not all right. I mean, they don't. They don't know their history.
Yeah.
I think is the problem. Like, there is such an mainstreaming of queerness that has happened.
Yeah.
That they're living in this kind of ahistorical reality, whereas like any gay man who's over 40 has lost a loved one to AIDS.
Yeah.
And they forget that. And it also makes me want to because it's such an assimilationist attitude of like desexualizing queerness, which, like, let's be real, we never want to talk about that aspect of it because, of course, we want like basic rights, but we're being denied basic rights based on like who we fuck.
Yeah.
So it is about sex.
Yeah.
So, and that's
like totally gets lost in the shuffle.
Exactly.
You know,
like people don't want to talk about that. Like it's about fucking. And you realize when you're looking at these debates how puritanical things still are. And there's like, I'm a good gay, you know, like there's always that person that's like, I'm not like those other gays, you know, like I don't want to see that stuff. Like I'm not into that weird stuff. And like, first of all, no one asked you to be. Yeah. But there's so many levels to it. It's just very disturbing to me.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I don't know. I think that there is definitely like a lack of history that happens with like a younger generation, but I also try not to make too many generalizations. I like try to keep an open mind.
Oh, well, there's definitely people our age and up who feel the same way.
Because I was gonna say like I'm disappointed by everybody always.
Yes.
And I think that's just my mantra. Like it's just like never be surprised by somebody else's self-loathing and just how like it comes out in all these like really strange ways. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think that like what a stupid thing to like waste your energy on.
It's just that
like there's so many other more important things. I'm sorry.
It's ridiculous, but it's this cry of like, what about the children?
What about the fucking children?
So talk to your kids about sex, and if you bring them, talk to them about sex.
Yeah.
Like talk to them
about
That is
why
what
we are
sex
marching,
is.
Okay?
Exactly. Like let's not take the sex out of it.
Yeah.
Like it's a big part of it. And leather sexuality, like leather culture, the leather scene was one of the first queer subcultures to really accept trans people, to really like be talking about safe sex and all of these things. And it gets lost as kind of just this like freaky thing that people like to do, and it's not really political when it is like inherently super political and like a
I mean, it's all about power.
Exactly.
And it's literally about power and like seeding it and having it, you know?
That's, part of why I wanted to talk about this film because it is so, maligned and seen as this really bad representation when in a lot of ways, like, it's actually kind of like hot and erotic and like all of these things. And it's, of course, it's like corny and campy and all this other stuff we've said. But is it better to have a movie like Bohemian Rhapsody or Rocket Man, which completely erases the sex that these people were having? Like that is,
or like, I mean, at the same time, it's like minimizes it, right, to this point of like being like an afterthought, just so we can chase trophies.
Yes.
And we can have like some sort of representation with, by the way, 2 straight cis white men in the leading roles, one of which won an Academy Award for lip syncing.
Right.
Like I think Drag Race needs to be given its credit, really, because that's really what that movie is. It's just like a lip sync for your life.
And it's heavily not erotic. Like it's for a mainstream straight audience.
I'm just laughing at how ridiculous.
It's so ridiculous.
It's
like
absurd.
Is this, and the kind of people, there's a group of queer people and young queer people, not to generalize, but a lot of young queer people think these movies are great. And like they're these great representations.
That's so weird.
And it's really disturbing to me because I'm like, is Cruising worse than that?
Oh, no. I would watch Cruising over those shit movies any day of the fucking week.
Exactly. Like, Cruising is at least fun.
Yeah.
Like, it's at least fun, and you also get to see people like you having sex, or like people, not people like you, but like, because they're like these crazy idealized bodies, but people who have desire and drive and these, imperfect lives.
Well, there's also like the movie like Rocket Man and Bohemian Rhapsody, it's this sort of tortured gay character. Like if you choose this lifestyle, you're always going to be unhappy, which is like something that was very much like personified through like mainstream film for like my entire life.
Yes.
And like it, you know, I guess you can read it through like a different sort of lens of like, oh, well, they still triumph, you know, they still have like the success that they need. But like the fact that it's like given so much weight in those films is like, you know, it's not lost, I think, on like a queer lens or a queer reading of those films.
Yeah. So, like, yeah, let me get to the ending of the film.
Oh, it's such a good one.
Yeah. So, Al Pacino goes to his girlfriend's house. They have a talk about how he needs to stop seeing her for a while.
It's just, he's just been through too much, you know, like the descent into madness has really taken a toll on him.
Yes.
And, you know, it's just like this sick perversion that he's had to endure. She'll never understand. And, you know, I love that because it's so fucking twisted that is how they portray gay sex and the gay lifestyle.
Right.
We don't hear that nearly enough. The gay lifestyle.
Right.
Oh, you know, like that was something growing up you definitely heard from like your
the
grandmother.
lifestyle. I'm taking it back.
Yeah.
Like it is a lifestyle. Like I don't associate with the heteros in that way.
Yeah.
Like it's, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm being facetious, but like, yeah, it's, you don't hear that too much these days.
But it's very much of that mindset, I felt like he's just been like pushed to the brink. He's like given everything to this investigation and it's just like, how much more can he take?
Yes. And he says to his boss that he can't handle it anymore.
What can't he handle? It's what can't he handle?
Right. He's very into what's happening, I think. This is when we get introduced to this Columbia student, Stuart, who, because one of the victims was a professor at Columbia, they're trying to follow that line of thinking. This guy Stuart is involved in the leather scene, and he was one of his students. He's roommates with the dad from Boy Meets World. There's this very long sequence where Al Pacino is watching him, like breaks into his apartment, reads his letters that he's written to his father. And it seems that maybe he's hallucinating. Like he's talking about how he sees like a figure in the trees, blah, blah, blah. He writes all these very disturbing letters to his father. So again, some daddy issues coming up. The kid, Stuart, has this sequence where he's haunted. He's haunted by his father, and he is sitting with his father on this park bench in this hallucination he's having, and he's saying like, no matter what I do, you just won't acknowledge me or love me. And his father is like, you know what you have to do. And the father's voice morphs into the homo killer's voice. So it's kind of almost like we now get that it's like almost like a Norman Bates situation. Like this kid has taken on the persona of his father.
Yeah.
To carry out these killings. So it's kind of ambiguous, but that's what I'm gathering from it.
I read it through that lens as well.
Yeah. And again, the unintentional accuracy of like a strained relationship with your father as a gay man. Okay, so Al Pacino is trying to set up Stuart.
That's a pretty hot scene.
Yes. He goes to the park trying to get Stuart to cruise him. And he falls for it. He takes the bait. And he's like, I just wrote here in my note the word hot with like exclamation points. And I also said, I want to be a mean gay dom. Because the way that he hits on him is like so mean in this very hot way. He's just like throwing his weight around And I think that's supposed to be like the movie. It's supposed to be like salacious and horrific, but I'm like, give me some of that. So
People are going to listen to this podcast and they're going to be like, these two are really fucked up. They really need help.
no, I don't think the people who listen to this will. No, like the people who listen to this podcast. Shout out to all the listeners are also weirdos.
Yeah.
So
thank God.
Yeah, exactly.
We found our audience.
Yeah, I've cultivated a good group of pervs who listen to this podcast. They get in an altercation. Oh, before that, though, I wanted to say that Al Pacino is trying to set up this sexual scene they're going to do, and he knows all the lingo. Like, it's so fucking funny.
Yeah.
The way that it's, like, mechanically, he's just like, I go wherever. Like, it's ridiculous.
More Al Pacino
I know.
voice, please.
And he's like taking off his clothes, and Stewart is like, I don't get anything. I don't do anything. Meaning like I don't get anything done to me. I don't get fucked, whatever it means. But it's so funny how much the movie makes of queer lingo and language and all this stuff. They get into an altercation, and Al stabs Stewart. And the cops in the hospital, the cops give him this offer of like, if you confess, you'll only get 8 years, because they don't give a fuck about gay men dying. I just thought that was like outrageous and also very indicative of the
time for sure,
and accurate. And he won't confess. Next scene, I forgot to talk about how Al Pacino gets in a fight with Ted's boyfriend.
Oh, yeah, like the abusive boyfriend?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a whole subplot.
Right. So Al Pacino gets in a fight with Ted's abusive boyfriend, who is like accusing him of coming on to Ted. It's really intense, actually. Al Pacino gets like actually in a fight. Like, it seems, I think it's like, maybe supposed to show that he is immersed in this to the point where he like actually cares about it now. Yeah.
Like where he has like empathy for another gay man, for a gay man.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think he also kind of has a crush on him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's like, you've shown me the ways.
Exactly. And the next scene towards the end, we see that Ted has been horribly murdered. Really violently murdered.
Yeah, girl. That was from the spoiler alert earlier in the podcast.
Yeah. Why did he kill Ted and not the boyfriend? I don't know. Yeah. But the captain who goes to the scene of the crime, he has this moment where he's sort of realizing, like, maybe we didn't actually catch the guy.
Yeah.
And then we see
It's a gay panic.
It's a gay panic.
It's a gay panic. It's classic, like gay panic, which we definitely like explored in the 90s with Jenny Jones and that whole like legal defense, but I read it through that lens for sure. It's like he definitely kills him, probably because he's growing too close to him and he needs to deny that part of himself and be done with this. But also it kind of makes you think like, there is that ambiguity, like, is he now the new homo killer?
Right, because the last scene we see him at his girlfriend's house again, and he's like, I want to tell you everything. I just got to shave. He's shaving his face, and as he is shaving, he looks directly into the camera.
Yeah.
And the movie is over, and we're left to wonder, was he the homo killer all along? Is he becoming the new homo killer? I don't know. What do you think? Do you think he was the killer all along, or do you think that you think Stewart was the killer?
I think Stewart was the killer.
Okay.
I don't think the movie's that smart.
Yeah.
But I do think that, he like probably has like so much self-loathing that happens as a result of like, because there is those scenes where like, is he or isn't he like in, taking part in like sexual activity with other men. It's probably like his way of now sort of exploring his sexuality is by murdering other gay men. That's the lens that I read it through. That's the trash like ending that I think that what we were meant to get is that he is now the homo killer.
Yeah, and it kind of almost proposes that psychopathy can be like transmitted from person to person, like in this almost viral way, like, which is, kind of scary considering what's going to come.
I don't know.
In the 80s.
I just like I never bought that the police cared. That why are they actually I feel like they were doing this as like a procedural thing. Like they have to find the homo killer just because they're getting too many calls, too many complaints.
Well, they do say that there is, and I might be getting this wrong, but I know that there is a scene where they say that the mayor is going to be running for re-election and that he wants this solved. Like kind of almost hinting that maybe he wants like the gay vote. Yeah. And if it gets solved under his, reign, then it it looks positive for him. So that's kind of what they hint at as being the urgency of solving it. But it's not super realistic.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't buy it. I find that it's definitely this sort of disgust that they have for gay men throughout the movie on the police force. It's just it's a hard sell for me. Yeah. And also we know historically the police don't give a fuck about queer people. No.
I mean, actually, the way that they treat them is like I say, very realistic. They beat the shit out of Skip. They torment this trans woman. Don't believe her. But as you were saying, it's was that meant to be? I think it was meant to be I think they thought they were being sympathetic to the gay community because that is what they said when they were interviewed about it. They thought that it was this kind of like Showgirls. They thought it was this really hard hitting, expose.
High art.
Yeah, exactly.
I could get behind that. Okay, you've won me over. You've won me over.
They are a bunch of straight dudes, so obviously they really don't know what they're talking about, but that's
where my suspicion has always been,
Well, I talk about this a lot on this podcast because pretty much every movie I talk about was made by straight men. But hear me out. I think sometimes straight men unintentionally do make great representations only because they're so entitled that they don't have any problem throwing their weight around and just doing whatever. Whereas I think queer people, we feel the burden of the entire community and history behind us when we try to make something. And I think, sometimes you don't. Sometimes you just want to live in a fantasy space. Yeah. And I think sometimes that is why I like these movies.
Well, this film is definitely that. Yes. It's it exists as its own thing. It's not tied to reality.
Exactly.
There are moments, there are these flashes of that where you're just oh, wow, that really does feel like an accurate depiction or something that still rings true today. But overall, it's it's its own sort of thing, where it exists.
Yeah. I don't know. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that maybe you wanted to talk about with this movie?
Well, I mean, I think, were we recording when we were talking about Richard Gere? Mm-hmm. Okay, good, because I really think this movie would have benefited from Richard Gere doing a full frontal scene. I think that's really where this film really falls short, shall I say. That there is no full frontal scene from Al Pacino. Maybe if he would have done that, maybe he would have won an Academy Award. Maybe people would be talking about this as one of his career highlights.
Well, in my mind it is. But, yeah, I mean, we do see his ass a lot.
I know, but ass shots are so cheap.
I know.
And are they really his ass?
Yeah,
or is it a
not.
body double?
Probably not. Yeah. Yeah, Richard Gere, I think, would have been a better choice.
Yeah.
More believable.
For sure.
As somebody who's ambiguously sexually identified.
Yeah. I mean, I think Pretty Woman is a really horrible film, but yet I really enjoy it. I've written college papers on Pretty Woman.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of how I feel about this. I'm very much not super interested in what the actual intentions were behind things. I'm more interested in what we can get from it without thinking about those things, because it's we know that everything is horrible. I already know straight men have no good intentions when they're trying to make something. I've moved past that. I've moved past accepting that, and now I just want to talk about why it's interesting or why I think it's important historically. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of humor that you can find in things like this where it's just like it's so over the top and it's so crazy that it transcends like its original intention, and it becomes this like amazing piece of, like I said, trash cinema. You know, it's like I always think about Showgirls, and that's my favorite film of all time.
Same.
And it's just like, you know, that horrible gang rape scene is like so like unforgivable that somebody would film that, and yet that movie is still it still is an incredible masterpiece. And I don't know, you know, you love it despite its flaws.
Yeah, and it's high camp because it's
Yeah.
the pure camp, which is, you know, ridiculous without intentionally being ridiculous,
Yeah.
like not self-aware.
And I always find that those films are always filmed really beautifully and like have high
Yes.
production value, and
Well,
it's
Cruising is gorgeous.
yeah, and that's where like I think it fits into the canon, and maybe it will be like reevaluated, like us talking about it, and just other people, like, you know, sort of you were saying, people talking about the kink community as part of the sort of pride celebration and like the sort of things that are flaring up. Maybe there'll be reconsideration.
Yeah, I mean, from a kink perspective, it is so accurate in so many ways.
Yeah.
Like people like fucking openly at leather parties. There's very much like a unabashed sexuality and eroticism that you don't see in movies that are catering to a heterosexual mainstream.
It must be so boring to be heteronormative. You know what I mean? Like
Oof,
to be
I
like,
pity them.
you know,
Truly,
it's like Aunt Ida in Female Trouble. The life
yes.
of a heterosexual.
is a sick and boring life. It really is. And queer people who try to fit into that, you know, you don't have to be into all kinds of kinky weird shit, but to completely reject that is just speaks to so much internalized
Homophobia.
shame and homophobia. Yeah. And it's, you know, there's like the argument like, but this is how straight people see us, and like if we give
I don't
them
care
that,
how they see us.
who cares? That's
Yeah.
like, can we move past this? Like
they're not-
clearly their opinions are not good or valid. Like, so they don't wash their ass. We already know that. Like,
Yo, that is so true though. Like
Yeah.
whenever I see like a really hot straight guy, I'm just like ill. Like,
Exactly.
you know, like that's like a really
he doesn't
great...
wash his ass. They don't talk about they're like literally just passing the same yeast infection back and forth for months. Like they refuse to talk openly about STIs. They refuse to like talk about good sex education. I'm generalizing because there's of course straight people who are doing those things. But but they
God.
there's like it's so, who cares what these people think? Like they barely can even handle having comprehensive sex ed in school. Like,
Go off, Addie, go off.
yeah, I don't give a fuck. I can't fathom giving a fuck.
Yeah.
Anyway.
What a delight.
Yeah.
This is so much fun. My face hurts from laughing and smiling. Like
I'm so glad you came.
it really, like, my face really hurts.
Did I change some of your perspective on cruising?
Yeah, I think you did. Like, you're a very persuasive speaker.
Thank you.
Your voice is also very soothing, so
Thank
I like
you.
hearing your voice. It puts me at ease. And yeah, I mean, I always thought that the movie was like so problematic, but it was so problematic that it was hilarious.
Yeah.
And so for me, it always just became like this thing where I'm like, it's so bad, it's great.
Right.
And I like really like bad things though.
Me
Like
too.
even like problematic stuff is like hilarious. Like if you can't laugh at something, you're just going to be unhappy all of the time, right?
Yes.
And so like I think that that's a big problem right now, is that like we all acknowledge we're unhappy with the way things are going in the world, and so like you have to like find space to like find things that are so ludicrous that they are unintentionally hilarious and hot and like seductive and amazing and all of these
Yes.
things that like give us joy, because you have to be able to have joy again.
I love like binging on queer media. Like,
oh my god, we didn't even talk about the new Tales of the City.
I haven't watched it yet,
oh,
but
girl,
I hear it's
what
good.
A shit show.
It's a shit show?
I mean, you should have me back and we should just talk about the new season because it is so earnest and so nauseating.
Well, this is the other thing is like sometimes
but also amazing.
Right. Things get into a territory where I'm just like, do we always have to talk about struggle? Like something I like about cruising is it's like it is not about coming out.
Yeah.
Like it's not about any kind of real life struggle. I mean, and in a way it is because like people, what am I trying to say here? I love watching things that are just about gay people. And this movie is just about gay people.
Yeah.
Like there's no kind of real wrestling with identity like, Mom, I'm gay. You know, like any kind of like coming out scene. It's wildly irresponsible and problematic. But in a way, that's sort of why I like it because there's no...
You don't get to see that kind of stuff anymore.
Yeah, exactly. There's no reality.
Everything is like audience tested.
Exactly. It's not audience tested.
Yeah.
Like, it's just offensive and...
We need more of that, I feel like.
It's just offensively gay.
Yeah.
Like, you know, part of what I think people find problematic in it is, like, the actual gay sexuality, which, you know... I think still makes people really uncomfortable. Like, I think people are still really uncomfortable seeing men have sex with each other. There are some things that are audience tested and, like, supposed to be these progressive landmark representations that are actually, like, worse representations than cruising.
Yeah. I completely agree.
Yeah.
I mean, I will say that the first 6 episodes of the new Tales of the City are endlessly enjoyable and, like, it's really amazing, like, to see, like, depictions of, like, lesbian sex and gay sex in, like, this really sort of unapologetic way. And Ellen Page is basically playing herself, and it's amazing, and I'm here for it. Olympia Dukakis showing up, being Anna Madrigal, pretty good. But, like, the straight people in that show are such a, like, wet towel. Like, I'm sorry.
Accurate.
I'm sorry. Like, Laura Linney, you need to go away. Like, basically, you are, like, your same character from Ozarks. I'm not interested. Go away.
Yeah.
And the show quickly devolves. Like, it becomes, like, caricature. But I hope you'll watch it because I think that there's, like, some really good stuff in there.
Oh, I'm absolutely going to watch it. But there's also some, like, really overly earnest stuff that, like, makes me really deeply uncomfortable. Oh, I mean, I'll watch anything queer.
Yeah.
But that's, like, I think part of why, you know, Queer Eye kind of rubs people the wrong way is it's, like, this representation of queerness that's like catering to a heterosexual gaze.
I just really hate Anthony because he's like this really beautiful, conventionally attractive person that like I loathe. You know, it's like
I think a lot of people feel that way.
Everybody's just like, oh, he's so beautiful. Oh my god. Oh my, and I'm just like, he like doesn't know how to do shit with food, and he's also very earnest, and I just really don't like him. I don't like earnestness. And
I don't like earnestness either.
Like, it rubs me the wrong way. I don't trust you.
I am damaged and deal with everything through humor. So,
Same.
like, earnestness really freaks me out.
But also, you know, I'm just, like, to go back on this Anthony, like, hatred. Like, I mean, I'm sure he's a perfectly lovely human being, but I just really can't watch that show.
Yeah.
That's all I want to say.
I support you. Where can people find you on social media?
They can. Oh no! What if they find me and they want to send me like death threats? I'm scared.
Do you not want to give you? You don't have to give you.
Pacifico_photo is my Instagram account. That's the one I mostly use. So if you want to terrorize me, that would be the one.
Wait, why do you think people are going to terrorize you? You
don't know.
Say anything crazy.
I don't know.
So I'll play us out here with the soundtrack written by the punk band The Germs. And you can find me on Instagram at Girls Guts and Giallo. You can also find me on Twitter as Girls Guts and Giallo. You can also find me on Patreon. Please subscribe to my Patreon. It's patreon.com/girlsgutsgiallo. And please rate and review. It really, really helps. And until next time, I'm Annie Rose Malamet, and this is Girls Guts and Giallo.